Namaste and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our class on the Katha Upanishad. Om Namo Brahma Dibhyo Brahma Vidya Sampradaya Kartribhyo Vamsharshibhyo Mahadbhyo Namo Gurubhyaha Om Shanti 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 Narayanam Padma Bhuvam Vashishtam Shaktim Cha Tatputra Parasharam Cha Vyasam Sukham Gauda Padam Mohantam Govinda Yogindra Mathasya Shishyam Shri Shankaracharya Mathasya Padma Padam Cha Hastamalakan Cha Shishyam Tantrotakam Vartikakara Manyan Asmadgurun Santatamanatosmi Om Shanti 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 Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryankaravavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. We salute all of the teachers of the great tradition of Vedanta, beginning from the divine being itself, who gave this knowledge to Brahma, the creator, who in turn gave it to the first sages, who passed it down in the lineage of teachers from the beginning to our present day. To all of them, our profound salutation. May that divine being protect us. May it sustain us. May we grow strength together. May our study be vigorous and illuminating. May there be no ill will amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So last time in the Katha Upanishad, we came to verse 17, but in chapter 2, chapter 2, verse 17. But this is dependent on verses 15 and 16. So I'll go back to verses 15 and 16 so that we have the background to come to, actually I should go to verse 14. I'll just read the English of 14 because that was a question by Nachiketa which led to the response of Yama, the Lord of Death. And verse 17, where we begin new text tonight, that is part of the answer. So in verse 14, Nachiketa asks Yama, the goal which all of the Vedas proclaim, sarve veda yat paramana mananti, tapamsi sarvani cha yad vadanti, and that which all austerities declare. And austerities in the Vedantic tradition means anything that concentrates the mind and generates spiritual energy, and it generates and conserves spiritual energy so that it can be redirected in a spiritual direction. So that that state which, or that goal which all of the Vedas proclaim, that which all austerities are directed towards, and that desiring which one enters into the stage of a brahmachari, studying the scriptures, etc., disciplining the senses in order to attain which. That I will tell you in brief, he says, sangrahena sankshipta bhave, in a abridged form, I will tell you, and that is Om. It's the simple word Om. So last time I spent a great deal of time speaking about Om, its significance. So let me just say now that again, Om is the most universal and the most comprehensive symbol, religious symbol possible. In fact, the most comprehensive symbol of any kind in any field of knowledge, because As Yama continues to explain in what we'll read next, Om represents the Saguna Brahman, that is the personal God. It represents the absolute Brahman, the transcendent reality, and it is this universe itself. It's the first vibration, the Anahata Dhvani, that which is unstruck. All sounds are made by things striking, or air striking the vocal cords, making a vibration of the voice. But this is the primordial vibration where there are no two. So there are not two things which can strike. And so this is the Anahata Dhvani, the sound, primordial sound out of which creation comes, the first vibration out of which all other vibrations come. And so everything here, as I explained last time, everything here is as it were, a piece of Om. So Om is the personal God, Om is the Atman Brahman, and Om is the universe in its seed form as well. And so you can't have anything which represents more than that. It represents the universe in its totality and all levels of the universe. It represents the personal and the impersonal absolute. So then in verse 16, Yama says, Etadhyevaksharam Brahma, etadhyevaksharam Param. This support, alambanam, this support is the Apara Brahma, that is the Saguna Brahman. It is the Param Brahma, the Supreme Brahman. Having known this etadhyevaksharam gyatva, having known this support, yo yadichasi tasya tat. Whatever one wishes, that comes to one. And so here it's interpreted that whatever one wishes means whichever of these two, whether you're seeking the Saguna Brahman, God, Ishvara, whom we worship, whom we pray to, whose mantra we repeat, or the supreme reality, transcendent reality. Whichever you seek through Om, that becomes yours. As I said last time, there's also a third or a second interpretation of this last part, yo yadichati tasya tat. And that is that when one has realized the highest truth, when one has become an aptakama, then it's said that whatever desire arises in the mind, that becomes fulfilled. So that doesn't mean, as I explained last time, that one suddenly thinks, I want a new Lexus, or I want, nowadays it'd be better to desire a Tesla, I want a new house, I want a new job, etc. No, it means that in one who has realized the highest truth, the mind is so pure that whatever arises in that mind, it's a pure desire, first of all, because all impurities have been burnt out. And then the person is, they have no contrary thoughts within their conscious or unconscious mind. The unconscious mind has been emptied, thoroughly purified, and so the whole of the mind supports whatever one thinks. So as I mentioned last time, Sri Ramakrishna, when he thought it would be nice to have a hut to practice spiritual discipline in Dakshineshwar, within days, a raft floated up onto the bank of the Ganges at the Dakshineshwar temple with all of the materials needed to build a hut. When he or the Holy Mother would think of somebody, they would suddenly wonder, I wonder how so-and-so is. Within 1 or 2 days, that person would suddenly appear, even if it was from a great distance. And so that's an alternative explanation or alternative interpretation, that whatever such a one desires, because it's a pure desire and because the mind has tremendous power, that desire also is fulfilled. But again, the usual interpretation is that whatever one wants, whether it's the Saguna Brahman, Ishvara, God, the personal God, or the absolute reality, that becomes attained. And then verse 17, which we were to start tonight, Etadalambanam shreshtam, etadalambanam param, etadalambanam jnatva brahmaloke mahiyate. So etadalambanam shreshtam, this support is the best. That is, it's the best support for the mind, for meditation. The greatest support because it is so comprehensive And again, because it's not an invented symbol, as I explained last time, it's not something that sages thought, well, what's a very comprehensive symbol that we could come up with? What about Om? Because we can imagine that Om represents the whole possibility of sound production and the human voice, so let's make it Om. No, it wasn't an invented symbol. It was something which even now can be heard in the depths of meditation. The Holy Mother used to say that before the Kundalini awakens, one hears the sound of Om. And so it's a reality. It's not just a symbol in the sense that it was designed. It's a reality. We use it as a symbol because Om, as we pronounce it in the human voice, it's a symbol of the real sound which is heard in the depths of meditation. And that sound, when it's heard, it's recognized as Om. So it's not that you hear a sound and you think, well, I don't know what that is. That's a strange sound, but let's call it Om. No, you hear it as Om, but it's beyond the human voice. It's a sound of wholeness, comprehensiveness, because that's what it is. It's out of that everything has come. So this is the greatest support for the mind in meditation. Etadalambanam param, this is the supreme support. And so some have said that this is the best support means for attaining Soguna Brahman, Ishvara, or it's the best support also for the attainment of the Supreme Brahman. I don't know that we need to divide the two that way, because that's not indicated by the words themselves. But this is the best support, and this is the supreme support. You can't find a support which is higher than Om. Etadalambanam jnatva brahmaloke mahiyate. Having attained or having known this support, that is, having realized through this support the Saguna Brahman or the Supreme Brahman, either one, brahmaloke mahiyate. So Brahmaloka, one becomes adored in the world, in the realm of Brahma. So that means different things depending on whether you attain to Ishvara or whether you attained to the absolute Brahman. If you attain to Ishvara, then you are adored in the world of Brahma, Brahmaloka. And so then the literal words are applied. If you attain to the Supreme Brahman, the infinite self, then you have become Brahman itself, and so you are as adorable as Brahman itself is. So whether we attain to the realm of Brahma or whether we take world of Brahma as a figure of speech, meaning Brahma itself, the Supreme Brahman itself, then we become worshipped in that realm. So this support is the best, this support is the supreme. Knowing this support, that is realizing this support, having practiced Om, and having realized the infinite reality, one is worshipped in the world of Brahman. And as I said last time also, that some say that the word Om, when you're meditating on it, you should think of it as coming from deep within yourself. As Swami Vivekananda explains, it represents the whole spectrum of sound production in the human verse, starting with the most undifferentiated sound, and oo, the rolling forward of sound, and closing with ma, the last sound that you can make with the mouth. So it represents the whole soundboard of sound. Consonants are known in modern linguistic terminology as stops. So consonants just stop the sound, which is made by the vowel sounds. And so Om again represents the totality of possible human voice sounds. And so some say that when meditating on it, you should think not just that it starts in the back of the throat like but that it starts very deep and comes up here. So Om, 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 again, so that you get that sense of completeness, that it's the whole soundboard. So This support is the best, this support is the supreme. Knowing this support, one is worshipped in the world of Brahman. So now we come to verse 18, which is very similar to a verse in the Gita, as is the next one as well. So this verse says, "Na jayate mriyate va vipastin nayam kutastin na babhuva kastit ajo nitya shashvato yam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire." So this says, "Najayate mriyate va vipastin." So this is that the vipastit, the knowing soul, the one who knows the truth. Najayate na mriyate va. So the knowing soul neither is born nor dies. Of course, the truth is, none of us are born and none of us die. But the knowing soul knows that for me, there is no birth. For me, there is no death. From direct experience, not from understanding. There's a great place for understanding. That's why we teach Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, hearing the truth, thinking about the truth, thinking about all the ramifications, and getting rid of all doubts about the truth, becoming convinced of the truth by thinking about it, and then meditating deeply on it. And so deep conviction is very important, but deep conviction is not realization. Deep conviction is that which leads to realization. And so the vipastit, the one who has seen the reality, who has realized the reality, knows that for me there is no birth, there is no death. Nayam kutastit na babhuva kastit. That it comes from nowhere and it goes nowhere. Nothing comes. It comes from nothing, and nothing comes from it. So the self, when it's realized as peace, as perfect stillness, as perfect as infinity without limitation, and without any activity whatsoever. Akriya. There's no activity in the self. And so there's no coming, there's no going, there's no activity, there's no nothing. It comes from nowhere, it goes nowhere, nothing comes out of it. That is, it's not the cause of anything else. We're used to thinking, because we're thinking from our standpoint within Maya, we're used to thinking that, well, this world has come out of Brahman, it's come out of the self. That's from our standpoint within Maya. From the standpoint of Brahman, there is no world. If we realize Brahman, if we are immersed in Brahman, then there's no question of world or anything else. There's no question of causation. There's no question of what has come out of this or how did the world come out of this. And so it's said that the realization of Brahman is the solution of all questions. All questions stop because then you realize that the questions themselves were asked from the standpoint of ignorance. As I said in a recent talk, it's as if the character in Kafka's Metamorphosis, it tells the story of a man who wakes up in the morning in his bed and finds that he's a caterpillar. And so if we were under the delusion that I had changed into a caterpillar and I were to go to a doctor to ask, well, I've changed into a caterpillar, as you can obviously see, so what can I do about it? The doctor sees that you're suffering from delusion. And so if the doctor says, I'm sorry, sir, but you're not a caterpillar, then the patient says, well, you obviously don't know my condition, so I'll go find some other doctor. So the doctor plays along with the patient and says, well, yes, I can cure your condition. You go home and take this placebo, without saying it's a placebo. You go home and take this, and after 3 days, your condition, you'll be back to normal. And when the person comes back to normal, they suddenly realize, oh my God, this was all just delusion. That never happened. How did I think that? How did that come over my mind? And so our questions now, which within our present state, they're legitimate. It's legitimate to ask questions, to question, to doubt, to think about things. But when we come to Brahman, then there's no doubt there. All doubts are silenced. That's why when people would go to someone like Ramana Maharshi, Many people would go, and I've seen that with some of our great Swamis also, that I had the privilege to live with for some time. People would come with all kinds of questions, and just in their presence, all questions would cease. They would find that the doubt that they had just disappeared. It was seen as insignificant in the presence of this person. And so the knowing soul, all of this was to say that the knowing soul means one who has realized, not who has a deep conviction. Conviction is important. That's what we need now. But conviction eventually turns into realization. So here it's speaking of one who has seen the reality, known the reality, knows that for me there is no birth, there is no death, the self comes from nowhere, nor does anything come out of the self. Ajo nitya shashvato yam purano. So this reality, the Supreme Brahman, which is the self, which is the Atman, Brahman, which is the Atman, is aja. It's unborn. It's unborn, and it is nitya. It's eternal. Now, eternal in the Vedantic sense doesn't mean what most religions mean by eternal. Most religions mean by eternal within time, but without end, just going on second by second by second forever. That is, there's still time, but time never ends. And so you live forever. And people, humorists like Mark Twain, have made fun of the idea of eternity in heaven because of the boredom one would suffer there. If you're living forever and you have nothing to do but play a violin sitting on a cloud, you would get tired of it very quickly. And you would very much more quickly get tired of other people playing the violin close to you. so the usual idea of eternity is going on forever. But the Vedantic idea of eternity is timelessness. There's no sense of time. There's no sense of succession. And that's the truth even here and now. Timelessness is the truth right now. It's that the mind works on the condition of time and space. The mind perceives everything in terms of time, space, and causation. We can't think of anything without time, space, and causation. That's why whenever we see something, we want to know how it came to be, the causation. And we see it within a particular time and within space. When we look back in history, we're looking back in time. When we're projecting into the future, we're projecting into time. And so the mind can't think of anything unless it's conditioned by time, space, and causation. But as I explained recently, the very concept we have of time, the experience we have of time, is based on a contradiction. That we think of the future, the present moment, and the past. And the present moment is where the future is turning into the past. And so we give great importance to the future and to the past, and the present moment is the center of boredom, where we don't know what to do with ourselves while we're waiting for the future to get here, something desirable that is coming, or when we're worrying over something we did in the past that we shouldn't have done and we feel bad about it. Why did I say that stupid thing or whatever? And so we live in the future and the past, but there is no future and past. That's demonstrable. It's obvious just to thinking about it. If I think about the past, where do I think about it? I think about it right now. If I foresee the future, I see that this is coming. Where do I see it? I see it right now. Where do I tell about it? I tell about it right now. There's nothing but the present. But time is the consciousness of change. It's the consciousness of, it's nothing but the consciousness of change. So if there is no change, if nothing is changing, as is the truth about Brahman and the Atman, which is the ultimate truth about everything, is that there is no change in reality, then the sense of time disappears. The sense of succession disappears. That's not even conceivable by us now. We can understand it intellectually, conceptually, and sometimes we can almost feel it if we think about it very deeply. But if we could really feel it, that would be realization. And so we can't really feel it because it's outside of the mind's power. The mind is conditioned by time and space. And so to think of the now moment as utter stillness, eternity without any change, and eternity as timelessness, then the mind can't do it. We can only sort of conceptualize it and deal with the concepts. But it's very helpful to think of it because thinking of it, we can try to imagine it, and then we begin to get a sense of it. Not the realization, though that would be nice and eventually we'll get that. But even if we get a sense of it, it begins to make deeper sense to us. And then we begin to see the desirability of it. And so even meditation is an attempt to come to that. In meditation, when we try to first calm the activity of the mind, to center the activity of the mind on a point and to bring it into focus, gradually what we're trying to do is to bring the mind to a state where the mind is perfectly focused and it becomes still. First, focused on something. And so the lower samadhi, where the mind is perfectly focused, and just the same wave keeps rising in the mind, the sense of time practically disappears. There's still the slight awareness of time, but it's so subtle it's nothing like our present sense of time. And so in that state, the mind is practically still, but it's actually the same wave rising again and again in the mind without any contrary waves. But in the higher samadhi, it's said that even that wave subsides, and then the brahmakara vritti, the mind takes the form of Brahman, of course, which has no form, but it takes the form of Brahman and dissolves into Brahman, because the mind can't remain the mind in the infinite. And so the mind merges back into Brahman. So time is, it's unborn because it's outside of time. It's nitya, it's eternal, which means outside of time, not going on forever, moment by moment. Shashvato, that is interpreted, Shashvato can mean eternal as nitya can mean eternal. Shashvato is interpreted by Shankara to mean unchanging or undecaying. It doesn't decay. And so it's unborn, it's undecaying. Purano, ancient. It's ancient. But it's ancient in a special sense. That is, it is before the universe was. That is, Brahman is always is. There's a beautiful name, one of the Vedic names for Shiva, which is Sadyo Jata, ever born anew or always new. And so Shiva is the Purano and Sadyo Jata. Shiva is always new and always ancient. And so that's what it's, when it says ancient, it means that even before the universe came into being, Brahman not was, because that's putting Brahman in time. Even to say Brahman is putting it in time, but it's closer to the truth because Brahman is always present. Brahman always is, never was. If you can say anything about Brahman, you can say that Brahman is, not that it was. But ancient because it was before the first impulse of creation, before the first vibration of Om. Of course, Om is continually reverberating, giving being to the universe. But before the first vibration of Om gave the start to the present kalpa or ancient kalpas, Brahman is. So it's unborn, it's timeless, it's unchanging, it's ancient. Nahanyate hanyamane sharire. It is not killed when this body is killed. So when this body is killed, the self is not killed. One of the great impulses for religion, for the religious impulse within human beings, is the search for something that doesn't die. We see people dying and we think, this, my beloved was here a moment ago, so full of life, and now there's no person there. When you see a dead body, you realize what a tremendous difference there is between a dead body and a living person. It's not just like a clock which breaks. If you have a mechanical clock, I know it's the same for a digital clock, but going back, it's easier to think in terms of mechanics because we can visualize that more easily. So a mechanical clock, a wind-up clock, the spring or something breaks, and it's just a broken clock. But you don't think, where did the clock go? Oh, where did the clock go? It makes no sense. The clock's right there. It's just broken. But when a person dies, you do feel that. Where did my mother go? Where did my father go? Where did my beloved go? Where did they go? They're not here. The body's here, but that's not who they were. You realize that in that moment, that this isn't who my mother was. My mother was, she wasn't a dead body. And so she has gone somewhere. And so the religious impulse comes from that. One of the causes for the religious impulse, there are several, is the search for that which survives death. And so the Vedanta says that the self, which is one with Brahman, or even the Jivatma, even the individual self, which has forgotten its identity with Brahman and thinks of itself as individualized, even the individual self doesn't die. And the Supreme Self certainly doesn't die. And that's, again, one of the purposes of meditation. In meditation, we try to bring the mind to a point of focus, and then to stillness, and then to transcendence. So we even in the stage of ekagrata, of one-pointedness, the sense of time practically disappears. It all but disappears. Once, when I was at Mayavati, the Swami that I worked with, he was the editor of Prabuddha Bharata, and I was his assistant. One night during meditation time, we had an earthquake at Mayavati. The center of it was many miles away, and it didn't do any damage at the ashram where the epicenter was. There was a lot of damage in Pithoragarh. But where we were, it didn't, but we all felt it. And it went on for about a minute. It was one of the longest earthquakes I've been in out of many earthquakes I've experienced, having lived in California many years. So it went on for about a minute. It was shaking, and everybody felt it. So at supper time, after this had happened, everybody came to supper. And we hadn't seen it because in Mayavati, there's no meditation hall, there's no temple. It's devoted to the practice of Advaita, non-dual practice. And so we each meditated in our room or out in a kutir or someplace by ourselves. So we gathered at supper, and people started talking about the earthquake. And the Swami that I worked with, he said, "Earthquake?" And we said, yes, didn't you feel it? And no, there was an earthquake. He was so disappointed because he had always wanted to feel an earthquake. He was from South India and had never felt one there, though probably there are occasional in some parts of South India, but he had never felt one. But then he tried to hide the fact that he hadn't felt it by saying that, oh, I thought it was a monkey jumping on the roof. Well, this didn't feel like a monkey jumping on the roof at all. Though at Mayavati, we did have monkeys who jumped on the roof, but it was obviously not that. But I knew because I worked with him, and he used to tell me about his experience, that at that time he would, in the time of meditation, he would often go into samadhi. Not nirvikalpa samadhi, but one of the beginning samadhis at that point in his life, where the mind was perfectly focused. And he would tell me that after coming out of that state, I have no idea how much time has passed. It could be a minute, it could be 2 hours, I don't know. It's only when I look at the clock that I see, oh, it was 45 minutes, that I had no awareness of anything. As in deep sleep, when we're in deep sleep, we don't think when we wake up from deep sleep, oh, I was in deep sleep for 2 hours and 35 minutes. No, like, God, I didn't know anything. Everything was, there was just the consciousness of absence. Everything was gone. And how long I was there, I don't know, but I wish I could go back to it. And so with Samadhi, he said that the sense of time there was a slight sense of time, again, because there's the wave, one wave after another, but the same wave. And because the wave doesn't change, and the rapid succession, like a movie screen where you don't see the individual frames, but here it's like each frame is just white light. There's no action going on. And so there's practically no sense of time. So he would tell me that, yes, in that state, there's practically no sense of time. So again, it's unborn, it's eternal, it's unchanging, it's ancient. It doesn't die with the death of the body. So, as I was saying in meditation, one of the things we feel is timelessness. Another thing that we begin to feel as meditation deepens is that there's something about me which is unaffected by the circumstances of the world. One begins to feel a space within the depths of one's being, which is unaffected by the outer waves of the world. And as that begins to develop, one begins to feel that this is not changed even by birth and death. This continues in the midst of birth and death. One begins to get an inkling, at least, an initial feeling of deathlessness. That within me, where I'm centered, when I'm centered in that, I feel that there's nothing that can disturb that. Yes, my mind can be as disturbed because I don't yet have complete control over it. But when I can bring the mind back to that, then nothing can, as long as I can stay there, nothing disturbs me. And that you begin to get a sense of timelessness, and thereby you get a sense of deathlessness. Because death obviously only happens in time. So one feels that even with the death of the body, for me, there is no death. So one of the things that spiritual life gives us, even forget all of the higher levels of meditation that I was speaking of, but even at lower levels of spiritual development, we begin to lose the fear of death. We've all heard of near-death experiences. It even has its own acronym, as everything has an acronym nowadays, NDE. So people can only speak in letters nowadays. They can't speak in words. So we all know about near-death experiences, which are real. And I've known people who have had near-death experiences. And so one of the things that many people who return from a near-death experience say is that now I have no fear of death because I know that on the other side of death, I am. So death is just a change of state, as sleep is a change of state. And so one loses the fear of death. So with spiritual practice, even long before any high realization or anything like that, one begins to feel that one begins to be able to confront the fact of death, and the fear of death begins to diminish. So that is one of the great benefits of spiritual life. What we want with spiritual life is ultimate realization, but that doesn't come just because we want it. That comes as a result of a lifetime of effort or lifetimes of effort. But it's not that spiritual life is a path of difficulty where you have to do all of these practices and go through all of these difficulties and so forth. And then at the very end, you sort of stumble into the ocean of bliss and then everything is okay. But it's all misery up until that point. No, the spiritual life, all along the way, there are advantages to spiritual life. Even when we feel that the life is difficult and maybe I shouldn't have come this way, I could have had a more relaxed time, had a good time. No. The reason why we come to spiritual life is because the other life is unsatisfactory, and we've understood that. So one of the great stages we can come to in spiritual life is when we realize there's nothing to go back to. Not because I can't go back to it anymore, but because there was nothing there to begin with. That's why I came in this direction. So why should I try to go back to that thinking that, well, I'm not getting anything here, maybe I should go back and get fulfillment there. We didn't get it there to begin with, that's why we came this way. So we have to stay the course and keep going. But eventually we find that there are stages, even at the early levels of spiritual life, where we get that conviction that no, there's no place to go but the direction that I'm going. There's nowhere else to go. So whether I attain to that in this life or not, I'm just going to stay the course. I'm going to keep going because in this life or the next life, I'm bound to get it. I often mention that the Buddhists speak of the Srotapanna, one who has become a stream enterer. That once you've entered into the stream of Dharma, then that will carry you forward. Then there's no turning back. And so in spiritual life, if we can get to the point where we enter the stream of spiritual life, meaning that I realize, no, there's nothing to turn back to. This is where I want to go. This is the only place to go. So again, that comes through meditation as well. So the knowing soul is not born, nor does it die. It has not come into being from anything, nor has anything come into being from it. This unborn, eternal, everlasting, ancient one suffers no destruction even when the body is destroyed. So again, just thinking of these things, we begin to get a feeling for them. We begin to get a feeling for if we, well, let me start over and put it this way. The same teacher, Upa Guru, a subsidiary teacher who told me about his own experience of samadhi, used to say that when studying the scriptures, or something like the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna or the Holy Mother, any holy book, think as you're reading it, what does this mean to me, and what can I do with it now in my life? And so even thinking about these things, we begin to get a feeling for them. And then we begin to get a sense of the desirability of that state. And those who follow the path of devotion, which is most people in spiritual life are following the path of devotion. We start on the path of devotion, wanting devotion, but not really feeling actual devotion, but wanting to have devotion. We're devoted to the idea of having devotion. And so we try, we go forward. But one day, suddenly, and then the first time it happens, it's just for a little while and then it goes away. But it gives us a taste, which means, no, I know now the direction to go in. I want to go. We get a taste where we suddenly feel a spontaneous love for God and a forgetfulness of everything else. There's nothing else I want. I only want you. I only want to attain to you. And so we get a taste of that, and that gives us something to aim towards. And so in the path of knowledge, if we think of these things about deathlessness and so forth, we begin to get a feeling for it, a taste for it, and then it gives us a sense of direction. Yes, now I know that's where I want to go. So verse 19 continues the thought. Hanta chen manyate hantum hataschen manyate hatam ubhau tau na vijanito nayam hanti na hanyate. Hanta chet manyate hantum. If the killer thinks that I am killing, hatas chet manyate hatam. If the one being killed thinks I'm lost, I'm killed. Ubhautau na vijanito. Neither of them know the truth. If the killer thinks I'm killing this person, and the person who's being killed thinks I'm killed, neither of them know the truth. Again, this is the Gita and the Katha Upanishad share several verses and share much thought. In fact, both of them have a lot of Sankhya within them. Within Vedanta, there's a lot of Sankhya to begin with, but in the Katha Upanishad and the Gita, the Sankhya is quite visible. And so the Katha Upanishad and the Gita there are many parallels between them. And both are beautiful in their poetry. The language itself is poetic, and the images are very poetic. So neither of them know the truth. If one thinks that I am the killer, or if one thinks that I am killed, neither of them know the truth. Ubhautau na vijanito. Neither of them knows. Nayam hanti na hanyate. This, the self, neither kills nor is it killed. Neither kills nor is it killed. So the self, the Atman, is not involved in any action. Is not involved in any change. And so when we think I'm killed, it's because I've identified with the body. As we will see one day when we do die, as many people have said, I forget who said in modern times, but the one thing that can be safely predicted about everybody is that you will die. When a baby is born, the one prediction you can make without any fear of contradiction is that one day this being the body will die. And so death comes to everyone. And so when we die, we'll see that we are there watching the death. We are seeing the death and the change to a different state. Those who go through a near-death experience. These are not people who have attained to illumination. These are ordinary people, sometimes good, sometimes not so good. Some people have returned from a near-death experience, and they've been transformed for the better because they realize that I was really a worthless person, always cheating to get ahead, stepping on other people. Now I realize that that's not the way to live. But again, they're ordinary people who have near-death experiences. And so they experience going through a tunnel and coming out into the light and things. That's not the same experience that a person of illumination will have. The person of illumination will see that I go nowhere. There's no tunnel, there's no light, there's just the infinite light of the self, the transcendent light of the self, which is beyond both light and darkness. But even for us ordinary people, when we die, we'll see that there is no death for me. There is no death. That was one of the great benefits that I had when attending on someone in hospice who was passing away for a couple of weeks, staying with them. And they began to talk to me about the things that they were seeing. And I could see that they were beginning to see more of the other world than of this world. And so if you have that opportunity to witness, it gives great conviction in the reality that this world of perception is just one of many worlds. And so just as when we go to sleep, this world disappears and the dream world appears. And the dream world disappears and the absence of everything in the state of deep sleep appears. Because deep sleep is not a state of non-perception, it's a state of perception of nothing, but it's actual perception of nothing. And so that appears. And when we die, this all disappears, and then another state appears. There's actually a point in consciousness where it's like a neutral in shifting gears. If you have an old-time gear shifting car or truck where you have to put in the clutch, there's neutral, and you have to come to neutral to change gears from first to second, third to fourth, or into reverse. You first pass through neutral. And so there is a neutral between the different states of perception where we see different worlds, you see different states of consciousness. And we will experience something of that at the time of a death. So if the killer thinks that he is killing and the killed thinks that he is killed, both of them know it not. It kills not, nor is it killed. And this, again, these verses, if you look in chapter 2 of the Gita, you'll find around 19, you'll find these similar verses. So let me just come to the next verse and then we'll stop. And if there are any questions, I'll answer those. The next verse says, which is number 20, Anoraniyan mahato mahiyan atmasya jantor nihito guhayam tamakratu pashyati vita shoko dhatu prasadaan mahimanam. So this is like what's the name of the sutta in Dhara Vidya, in the Mahanarayana Upanishad, which begins with these same words. Anoraniyan mahato mahiyan atma guhayam nito janto. So the words are a little different, but the first phrase, the words are the same, but the order of the second part of the phrase is different. So anoraniyan, it's subtler than the subtlest. And mahato mahiyan, and greater than the grandest. So in the modern world, in the modern world of physics, Einstein dealt with the world of relativity, which is the world of the vast. And Heisenberg and others, Niels Bohr and others, dealt with the world of the ultimately tiny, the quantum world. And so the self is smaller than the smallest, subtler than the subtlest, but it also indicates smaller than the smallest, and greater than the greatest. And so the self is that, again, the self means Brahman also, the Atman or Brahman, depending on our perspective, looking objectively or looking subjectively. The self is smaller than the smallest and yet greater than the greatest. Greater than the greatest, that's easier to understand because taking the whole universe as a whole, if we could come to the edge of the universe, we would find that Brahman is greater even than that. That there was, I've never known which one, because one of our great Swamis, Swami Ashokananda, just mentioned one of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. So I don't know which one because I've never seen it outside of Swami Ashokananda, his words. But he said that one of the great disciples of Sri Ramakrishna had attained to a state where they saw the whole vast universe as a speck on the far horizon of the ocean of the self. So that is, of course, speaking in spatial terms. It's not that the self is spatial. It's greater than the greatest and smaller than the smallest because it's not spatial. Space is a condition of the mind. The mind imposes space, the mind imposes time, and the mind imposes causation as the conditions of its understanding and perception, and the self is outside of all three. But the whole vast universe was seen as just a speck of dust on the horizon of the self. So to us, the universe is this vast thing, and I'm this tiny little insignificant person on an insignificant planet in an insignificant solar system, in an insignificant corner of an insignificant galaxy, in an insignificant system of galaxies. Because now even galaxies are known to form systems. And so who am I? Just this insignificant being. But no, Vedanta says all of that is inside of you because you are the self, and the self is greater than the greatest and smaller than the smallest, because even if we go to the smallest, if we could go to the smallest subatomic particle, we would find that the self, the whole of the self is inside of that. The smallest unit that you could possibly come to, you'd find that the whole of the infinite self is inside of that. Swami Vivekananda said that the reason why people have difficulty with the idea of the incarnation of God is that they're thinking of God as spatial. Why it is that the Abrahamic religions, except for Christianity, because they make an exception for Jesus, but why the Abrahamic religions have difficulty with the idea of image worship. It's because they're thinking of God as spatial. God is vast. How can God be this clay image? Or how can God, for Jews and Muslims, how can God incarnate in a human being? God is larger than the universe, and you're saying that God can be in one human body? Well, Swami Vivekananda said that's because the self, God, the divine, is not spatial. And so we're thinking that, well, God is so big, how could it be contained within a human body? But no, the whole of reality is within every particle. God can't be divided. You can't, it's not that there's some God here, some God here, some God here, there's more God out there. And if you go to Louisiana, you'll find even more God. No, the whole of God is everywhere. The whole of the divine being is in every point. So it's greater than the greatest. If you took the whole universe itself, God is greater than that. And yet the whole of that is within the tiniest particle. So subtler than the subtlest, greater than the greatest. Anoraniyan mahato mahiyan atmasya jantor nihato guhayam. But the great mystery and the great delight of the sadhaka, of the spiritual aspirant, is that that being which is smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, is hidden within the hearts of all beings. And so there is a place where we can access it. We don't have to go beyond the universe out to become bigger than the universe to find it, nor do we have to go to the quantum world to find it within a subatomic particle. That being is hidden within the hearts of each being. We can find that being right here, not because it's only here, but it has made itself accessible to the human consciousness and the consciousness of other beings also, if they had the wherewithal to turn their attention to it within the heart. So Atmasya Jantor Nihito Guhayam, hidden in the heart of all being. Tamakratu Pashyati Vita Shoko. So the desireless one, the Akratu, who is desireless, and Vita Shoka, who is without any sorrow. Tam Pashyati, sees that. So the desireless person who has gone beyond all sorrow sees that dhatu prasadat, by the grace of the senses, which means by the purification of the mind and senses. When the mind and senses become perfectly still, perfectly sattvic, perfectly transparent, that's the grace of the mind and senses, the dhatu prasadat mahimanam atmanaha. They see that, the greatness of the self. So the running translation, the self, smaller than the smallest and greater than the greatest, dwells in the hearts of creatures. The desireless one, being free from grief, realizes that glory of the Atman through the purity of the senses and the mind. So this, let me just conclude for now, for this class, by saying that this is, again, all of this has been the answer to Nachiketas's question, that that which you behold, O Yama, this was verse 14, as different from dharma and adharma, that which is outside of the very question of dharma and adharma, morality and immorality. Not that it's immoral, but it's outside of the very question of good and bad and other opposing dualities. As different from cause and effect, as different from what had been and what shall be, please tell me that. So this which we've studied tonight is the answer to Nachiketas' question. What is that which is outside of dharma and adharma, which is different from cause and effect? It's not affected, but it's not the cause of anything nor the effect of anything. As different what had been and what shall be. It's neither the past nor the future. Please tell me that. So that is what Yama has told Nachiketa, and through Nachiketa has told us. So next time we will study the remaining 5 verses of this chapter. So let me see if there are any questions. I'll give announcements, and then if there are any questions from the YouTube audience, I'll take those, and if there are any questions here also, I'll take them. So first, for announcements, we will have the Thursday class at 11 o'clock in the morning on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, as usual. On Sunday, I will speak on the topic, I forget how I phrased it, but the idea is finding our point of rest. That is, finding the point within us where we feel truly at rest and at peace. So finding that place within us. And then next week, we'll have the conclusion of chapter 2 of the Katha Upanishad. But after the 15th, when we'll have another Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class, after that, we're going to take a break until the beginning of September, or until after Labor Day. So the second half of July and all of August will be closed for classes and lectures until after Labor Day in September. So, okay, Surenji, are there anything there? Yes. So the question is, for those of you who are not here in the hall, isn't the fear of death, isn't that because of attachment to the body and everything? And so yes, certainly that is. If we weren't attached to the body, we wouldn't be afraid of losing the body. And so we are afraid of death, and it's not just the body. Certainly that is central to our attachment, because this is who we think we are. We think that we are the body. And so if this disappears, we are lost, because this is who I am. But we're also attached to this. So even if I am convinced through my thinking that I don't die, just the body dies, still there's the fear that, but I'm going to lose all of this. My family, my loved ones, my possessions, all of those things, I'm going to lose everything. And so attachment is the cause of all fear, All fear is the fear of losing that which is attachment. In fact, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali talks about the 5 kleshas, but 3 which are important for right now, the 3 emotional kleshas. Raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. Raga means attraction towards, that is desire for something. Dvesha means hatred, but here it means feeling repulsion towards. So one is attraction towards, one is repulsion towards, and abhinivesha means fear, and it's defined as the fear of death. But we have to understand that the fear of death is the cause of all fear. When we're afraid of anything, it's the fear of loss, which is tied to the fear of death. And so the fear of death is one of the 3 primary kleshas: desire for something, repulsion from something, and running away from fear. So towards, against, and running away from. Those are the 3 primary reactions that we have. So what is meant by having known Om, having heard the Anahata Dhvani? So more than that, that's a good question. What is meant by having known Om? Etadalambanam jnatva, having known this support, which means Om. Brahmaloke mahiyate, one is adored in the realm of Brahman. Does that mean having heard the Anahata Dhvani? So we hear the Anahata Dhvani, and that's a sign that the mind has become very subtle, that our meditation has progressed a long way. That's a relatively high experience, but it's not what he's talking about of having known this support. Having known this support means having known that which it signifies, which is Brahman. So having known through the support of Om, having known the self itself, then one is great in the world of Brahman. And in the translation it says the world of Brahman. Is that Brahma Loka? Well, no, that Brahma Loka, again, that means 2 things. If you attain through Om the Saguna Brahman, Ishvara, God, the beloved whom we worship and pray to and sing bhajans to, then yes, it means Brahma Loka. So remember that Vaikuntha is a neighborhood in Brahmaloka. Kailasa is another neighborhood in Brahmaloka. Ramakrishna Loka is another neighborhood in Brahmaloka. But it means through the attainment of God, one dwells in Brahmaloka with the beloved. But it also means if one, through the medium of Om, one attains to identity with Brahman, one becomes Brahman, then Brahmaloka just is a figure of speech. It means that in the realm of Brahman, which is Brahman, Brahman is not different from its realm. There's Brahmaloka, which is Chaturbukhi Brahma, the 4-faced Brahma, the cosmic mind. So that's one meaning of Brahmaloka for those who attain to Ishvara. But those who attain to identity with Brahman, Brahmaloka is just a figure of speech, meaning Brahman itself. So any other questions before we close? Okay, so then we'll see you next time. I knew there's something else I wanted to add. As I said, on the 15th, that will be our last class. That will be a gospel class on the 15th of July, on Thursday. And so next week will be the last Katha Upanishad class for now, until after the break. And so we'll finish, that's why I want to finish these at a chapter end, so that when we come back after the break, we can begin the 3rd out of the 6 chapters of the Katha Upanishad. Of course, as always, I'll give a little review of what came in the first 2 chapters, but we will begin a new chapter when we come back. So let me give a closing chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. That infinite being is full, perfect, and complete. This relative universe is full, perfect, and complete. From out of the fullness of that infinite being, the fullness of this universe has come, and yet that being remains ever the same. Oh, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.